Imagine a narrow strait through which world's one-third of oil passes every day. Now imagine it's shutting it down. The current crisis escalating in the Middle East, where US, Israel and Iran at war with each other, is threatening one of the most crucial choke point for the global energy route. That is the Strait of Hormuz. The retaliatory measure taken by Iran against US and Israel strike is of shutting down or closing the Strait of Hormuz, putting energy security of most of countries in Asia at high risk. So in this video, we will try to understand which countries are going to be impacted here, how or what kind of implications it will have on the global economy, as well as what is the role played by Strait of Hormuz on India's security, energy security, and how India is also going to be impacted here. So first of all, to understand the Strait of Hormuz, it has been in news due to the continuous conflict going on between US, Israel and Iran. The setting or closing of this strait has led to the disruption in the supply of energy, which is going to have ramifications overall on the entire global trade, and economic consequences are also expected. So first of all, let us try to understand which region or which strait are we talking about. So if you look at the map of the region here, the West Asia, Middle East, in the south, we can say you have the Arabian Peninsula, where you have several countries such as Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Saudi Arabia is the largest country, and then you have UAE and Oman. On the other side, we can see the country which is Iran. So somewhere in between Arabian Peninsula and Iran sits a very vital choke point, and this region is what we call as Strait of Hormuz. If you look closely, the region connects Persian Gulf in the west to Gulf of Oman and further Arabian Sea in the east. Now, if you look at closely the map, several countries which are major oil and gas producer, such as Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Oman, Bahrain, Kuwait, even Iraq, we can say, most of these countries depend on this particular route to ship their oil to the consumer. The major energy consumer we know are located in Asia. These are countries such as China and India being the dominant consumer, and then you have other countries such as Japan, South Korea, and the countries of Southeast Asia. All of these countries, or if you have to look at from the regional basis, all the countries of the Southeast Asia, East Asia and South Asia to a large extent depend upon this vital trade route, and this trade route now has been shut down by Iran as such, and this has led to the crisis unfolding in the energy sector. Now, overall, if try to understand about the countries that we have discussed, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Iraq, all the countries are dependent upon it. Now, first of all, if you look broadly, what is going to be the impact on global economy? So definitely energy shock is something that is expected, and it has been factored in the market also, that we have seen the crude oil prices rising at very fast rate. Straight because handles 25% of global oil trade, carries 20% of global LNG shipment also. And that's why we can see the several companies of Qatari government, we can say, they have introduced force majeure stating that they will not be able to supply as per their contract to the countries the gases, and the reason behind is the war. Definitely about 13 million, if you talk about in terms of complete total volume, 13 million barrels of oil per day passes through this particular strait as such, and closer definitely would push oil price at least above 100 per barrel. 100 per barrel. Now, before war started, the oil prices was hovering somewhere about between 60 to 70 per barrel, and even some forecasters have stated that if situation is not brought under control in short period of time, we can even see in the near future oil touching $200 per barrel. Now, before moving forward, let us try to understand the major countries, the energy consumer which are dependent upon this route. So as you can see, if you look at last 5 years of data, continuously we can see a trend emerging here, where China has been the largest exporter of oil from this particular route as such. China even was importing oil from Iran, which also ships oil using this route itself. Then second largest consumer is obviously India. Then we have South Korea, Japan, and then you have other Asian countries. As far as the Europe and United States are concerned, they have minimal share here. That means from this graph itself, it is clear the major energy shock that will be, or that will have to be absorbed by the economies, it is going to be these top 5 countries as such. Now, what is going to be the overall impact on the economy apart from the shock and supply and disruption in the oil? Obviously, because the oil and gases also form a base for the manufacturing of fertilizers. So we know that if we talk about urea fertilizer, to a large extent it is produced by natural gas. So about 33% of global fertilizer, first of all, passes through Hormuz itself, because the country which are having Oil and gas reserves, they are also one of the major supplier of petrol, major supplier of fertilizer as such. Then key route for other commodities such as aluminium, sugar, and petrochemical. Now we most of time think that in this when the straits such as Strait of Hormuz blocks, only oil and gas trade is affected, but that you can see is not true. It will affect the trade of more large number of commodities as stated here, and overall in all of these commodities, to some extent of supply chain disruption we would see here. Now definitely its further effect will be felt in the higher prices for clothing, because you know that a lot of clothes are made from the synthetic textiles. These synthetic textiles also, for them the raw material is the oil and natural gas, to some extent they can say petrochemical product as such, cookware as well as medical goods as such. Now, obviously, gasoline prices are likely to rise globally. Jet fuel prices obviously is going to increase. That means the price you pay for the airline ticket, the flight cost, it is going to increase in the near future. And because you know the entire transportation and logistics sector depend on the fossil fuel, and if fossil fuel faces supply disruption, that means the biggest impact you will see on the transportation sector. Now, it is a transportation sector which act as a wheel that transport commodities from one place to other places, that transport raw material and the finished product between industries and the market. So, all of these to some extent will face the effect of this. So, we can say overall the inflation will definitely rise as the price of or increasing price of oil will gradually creep in almost all the sectors of economy. As far as the countries of South Asia is concerned, Pakistan is going to be the one of the most impacted country, because if talk about from the perspective of LNG, 99% of LNG import is from Qatar and UAE, and these countries are facing supply disruption. And not only supply disruption because Strait of Hormuz, many of the petroleum refineries, natural gas producing region of these countries have been struck by Iran using drones, and that's why to some extent of supply disruption we are seeing at the site itself. Bangladesh also will face a large gas deficit because it has strong LNG dependency on the same region. India, as far as India is concerned, for 80% of our oil and natural gas, we are dependent upon import. And within that, more than 50% of LNG import is linked to Gulf. Within that, we are heavily dependent on one country, that is Qatar. So out of the 50% that we are taking from Gulf, about 80% of it comes from the Qatar alone. And that's why Qatar and the Petronet, which is a partner organization, partner company of this, we can say LNG in India, it also has introduced force majeure. Region is vulnerable to immediate energy disruption. That is what we can see. Then further, as we know that if you look at map here, from the Strait of Hormuz, the oil first enters Arabian Sea, then it is supplied to India, it is supplied to Pakistan, it is supplied to countries such as Bangladesh, even to some extent of Sri Lanka, we can say. And then further, the oil tankers move in the East Asian region using the Strait of Malacca, and there the major consumers you have is China, Japan, and South Korea as such. So 75%, as far as Japan is concerned, 75% of oil import is from Middle East itself, which will be definitely affected because Strait of Hormuz. 70% of oil in South Korea is also coming from Middle East itself. Now, interesting thing to note here is that these countries seem to be most affected not only because they're heavily dependent upon oil import, but also due to the fact that they are running a very minimal amount of energy reserves. That means it is believed that within 20 to 30 days, maximum 3 to 4 weeks, that is the reserve which Japan and South Korea has. After that, they will face supply shock as such. And this has been factored by the South Korean market, and that's why we have seen in the entire Asian market, South Korean market plunged to a greatest extent, 10 to 15% of decline we have seen in the indexes, broad indexes. China, around 40% of oil import passes through Hormuz. That's why China is also vulnerable here. And this is the reason why they have decided to ban the export of petro commodities with immediate effect as such. Higher energy prices could affect industries as well. And overall, the cost of production would rise. Again, same thing, inflation is expected to increase. Now, coming to Southeast Asia, though we have small countries, but these smaller countries such as Thailand, Philippines, Malaysia, to a large extent, they are also vulnerable to this kind of supply shock because again, we have discussed the route is same. It enters to Arabian Sea, supply to South Asia, supply to Southeast Asia, supply to East Asia. So the entire this we can say transportation route is vulnerable today, is disrupted today because of the closure of Strait of Hormuz. So these countries also are going to face a problem. Malaysia, because if you talk here, they are uniquely situated because they are energy exporter. That means they export oil and natural gas. They may benefit, but otherwise countries such as Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, they would face supply shock, risk of inflation, and the increase in the current account deficit. Now coming to India, If you look, obviously energy security, very vital aspect of entire economic development. So about 60% of India's oil import comes from Middle East, where the largest exporter are countries such as Saudi Arabia, Iraq, you have United Arab Emirates. As far as the gas is concerned, over 50% of LNG is coming from Gulf, 80% of which comes from Qatar alone, and apart from that some amount we take from Bahrain as well. Closure could disrupt the supply chain. Energy import bill in the near future is expected to increase as such. So after this, what will happen? The economic impact, if we try to link it with, the fuel prices definitely are going to increase. Again, fuel prices, right now government has decided not to increase fuel prices with immediate effect. The cost of diesel and petrol and other major fuels are same as it was before war. But the problem is that in India also, the amount of days for which we have reserved is roughly, we can say, 50 to 60 as per the government data. So we will start feeling shock when we near those 50-60 days. Right now we will not have any problem because we have enough reserve to ensure that the supply is well met. But what will happen after 50 days? Because as per the current government or current administration of US, current press release by the US administration, US government, they have been saying that it will take at least 4 to 5 weeks. Even President of US Donald Trump has stated it will take at least 4 to 5 weeks for the entire the situation to resolve. So that is what America believes. Iran says that they will keep on fighting as long as they can. So it is quite possible war may drag on for a couple of months also. In that case, fuel prices definitely will have to increase because there will be a supply pressure unless and until we find an alternative sources. Again, the problem there is that we were heavily relying on Russia till last couple of months. We're importing large amount of oil from Russia as such, and that route still is open for us from the Pacific Ocean and then through the Indian Ocean. But again, under the American pressure, we have decided to reduce the Russian oil purchase. So can we again go back to Russian oil? Are we going to increase further the shipment of Russian oil? That needs to be seen. So inflation pressure on economy definitely is there. Current account deficit, because the import bill will rise, export would remain muted or even might decline due to the closure of the vital trade. So current account deficit in the short term, obviously government will have to manage as it is expected to widen. And now because we are paying higher import bill, that means there is a more demand for dollar and less demand for rupees. So definitely a downward pressure on Indian rupee we will see, where Indian rupee may further weak vis-a-vis US dollar such. Now the impact on India will be seen definitely in the agriculture sector also, because for majority of our fertilizers, whether it is urea fertilizer, phosphatic fertilizer or potassic fertilizer, we are dependent on import. 30% of global ammonia production itself is at risk. That means the ammonium fertilizer, that means urea based fertilizers, will have disruption in the supply as such. 50% of global urea supply is exposed to this conflict, and we know that in India, one of the most commonly used fertilizer by the farmer is urea. So any supply to urea would definitely have a negative impact on agriculture, which can even cause decline in the crop yield, which will to some extent challenge the food security or stifle the food security of India. Higher fertilizer price is also expected, that would further pressurize Indian farmers who are largely of small and marginal nature, who cannot afford to use or have very high input cost. Impact on wheat, rice, cotton and sugarcane farming is expected, as these are the we can say the fertilizer intensive crops. Now in conclusion, what we can say, that definitely the crisis that we are seeing spreading out in the Middle East and the decision of Iran to close Strait of Hormuz would trigger global energy shock. There is no doubt about it. Major supply chain disruptions are possible if war drags on for a couple of months and beyond. Energy importing countries are most vulnerable. For example, when we talk about US, which is a direct participant in war, they will not face energy crisis because they are one of the major producer of oil and natural gas. Plus now they have also we can say to some extent have control over the Venezuelan oil as such. They would be able to manage it somehow. Countries in Asia are going to be on the receiving end of this stick. India and South Asia face significant economic risk, not only due to the supply shock of oil and gas, but its overall impact on almost every sector of economy, that is primary, secondary, or tertiary, can be expected in future. That's all about this particular video. If you like the video, please hit like button, share it with aspirants, as well as subscribe to the channel for more such content. Thank you very much.